In the deepest, most ancient memories of the earth, the existence of certain creatures is, in itself, a poem of concession and reconciliation. He possessed a gargantuan frame, 8 meters long and 5 meters tall, that, in the history of terrestrial life, should have marked him as the most terrifying predator of the primeval understory. Yet, unlike his brutal kin who relied on armored scales and razor-sharp claws to wreak havoc across the plains, his skin was draped in magnificent, subdued, and soft plumage. When spread, it resembled a wisp of warm, gray mist that refused to dissipate in the deep currents of time. This strange, almost divine, ancient giant bird did not choose to fall in a violent defense of territory, nor did he leave behind any echoes of savage lamentation in his final hours. Tonight, by the flickering warmth of the hearth, let us step into the true life of Cretaceous, a story not meant to be memorized, but felt. In the cold, taxonomic archives of paleontology, Gigantoraptor represents a giant oviraptorosaur from the late Cretaceous Earlian Basin, a creature whose scale dwarfed even several adult elephants combined. But in the true, trembling darkness of 70 million years ago, amidst tectonic upheaval and the impending panic of mass extinction, Cretaceous lived as an enigmatic puzzle, defined by the ultimate restraint of stillness. This is not a cold encyclopedia entry about territorial dominance or bloody conquest. It is a midnight song about how to shed the heavy burden of running in the face of extreme thermal turmoil, and how to wrap the world in a sanctuary of absolute, feathered warmth. On the edge of the Gobi Plain 70 million years ago, time seemed to stretch infinitely, the air heavy with the bitter, lingering scent of volcanic ash from the high humidity. It was the twilight age of armored dinosaurs and tyrannosaurs, their colossal forms crushing the forest ferns with every step, the sound of snapping vegetation echoing like a desperate cry. Cretaceous stood at the forest's edge, his feathered body a steady, gray statue amidst the shadows of ancient redwoods. The first turning point of his fate was a rare, months-long polar cold front that swallowed the Earlian Basin in a shroud of damp, freezing fog within hours. Temperatures plummeted, turning the lush shrubbery, their source of survival, into frozen husks overnight. The order of the plains collapsed into panic and famine. His kin, terrified, began a blind, frenzied flight through the dark forest floor. They shoved and clawed at one another, their keratinous beaks clashing in a brutal struggle for shallow caves to escape the biting wind. Cretaceous watched in silence as his companions, once brothers, tore each other apart, their beautiful plumage shredded into useless scraps and their blood staining the muddy banks. As a creature of inherently gentle and introspective nature, he was an outsider in this self-destructive chaos, drawing the suspicious glares of the elder leaders. In that moment, watching his kin descend into the ugliness of panic and greed, the tension within Cretaceous finally snapped. He realized that these beasts, who claimed mastery over the plains, were far more suffocating in their frantic violence than the drought itself. He did not rise to meet their roars, nor did he join the scramble for power. Instead, on an evening when the heat wave finally receded, he turned with agonizing slowness. He trod upon the cracked red earth, his movements as quiet and deliberate as a falling feather in the passage of time, walking away from the madness, stepping into the desolate and silent depths of the unknown wilderness. Leaving the protection of the herd meant facing the apex nocturnal predators that haunted the shadows, such as the Tarbosaurus lineages that favored swift, fatal ambushes. On the exposed plains, any sudden, panicked movement could have shattered his multi-ton frame under the weight of his own momentum. This was a restraint mandated by his sheer scale, yet Cretaceous stubbornly carried his slow, deliberate rhythm to the marrow of his bones, becoming a profound enigma that left predators uncertain of how to strike. He walked with heavy grace, because his magnificent, feathered wings demanded immense energy. Each step required a pause of several seconds as he placed his broad feet onto the dry gravel, creating a soft, whispering sound. It was not the gait of a fugitive, but rather a slow, sensory communion with the heartbeat of the land. Over months of travel, the persistent damp chill from the earth began to seep into his thick abdomen, causing a dull, gnawing ache that made his vast body feel cumbersome and painful in the night. He understood that without finding a safe, warm haven before the deep freeze took hold, this viscous, relentless pain would eventually crush his spirit. At last, as night fell completely and the winds over the plains subsided, he discovered a hidden sanctuary, a sunken hollow at the foot of a cliff, naturally enclosed by the silhouettes of hundreds of ancient, massive trees and shielded by towering boulders. It was a shelter sealed by nature itself. The high rock walls kept the howling seasonal gales at bay, maintaining a climate of constant, den-like warmth. At the edge of the hollow, Cretaceous slowed to a halt, testing the texture and temperature of the soil with his long forelimbs, and there, beneath the moonlight, began the rehearsal for the most important, eternal slumber of his life. In the shallow, modern tales that obsess over the visceral brawls and cinematic wars of giants, Gigantoraptor is often relegated to the sidelines, as if lacking the horns of a triceratops or the tail club of an ankylosaurus meant it was destined to be a victim in the meat grinder of fate. Yet, such arrogance fails to grasp the great wisdom in apparent foolishness that defined Cretaceous, a defense built on absolute self-restraint. His size was not a display of brute force, but an invisible wall of psychological defiance, allowing him to navigate the storms of his era unscathed. On the first night of his residency in the hidden hollow, danger nevertheless pierced the forest's perimeter. A Tarbosaurus, several times his mass and possessed of a ravenous, jagged maw, followed the faint scent of life, its footsteps silent in the mire as it crept toward his camp. A terrifying stillness paralyzed the canyon. From the predator's jaw, laden with short, serrated teeth, thick, foul-smelling, and corrosive saliva dripped onto the rocks with a faint, chilling scrape. Even the ancient cicadas, once buzzing in the dark, clamped their wings shut in an instant. The humidity in the air seemed to freeze under the weight of the hunter's predatory gaze. Yet, faced with an encirclement that would have sent any lesser creature into a paroxysm of terror, Cretaceous remained possessed of a near-divine, unsettling calm. He offered no useless roar, made no panicked dash. He simply shifted his center of gravity low, grounding his massive body firmly into the soft earth. He ceased all motion, tucking his head deep between his forelimbs and shielding his vital organs with the meter-long, hardened feathers of his arched wings, turning them toward the hunter. In the brief flashes of lightning that tore through the night, his wings shimmered with the cold, heavy luster of iron ore. He was no longer prey to be easily torn apart, he was an insurmountable, absolute fortress rising from the earth. The battle of wills lasted for a grueling hour. Ultimately, the cunning predator, confronted by Cretaceous' mountain-like, unshakable presence and steely restraint, watched as its ferocity dissolved into frustration. Exhausted, it turned and retreated, step by step, back into the depths of the dark forest. After the adrenaline of the standoff faded, the tropical rainforest reached its most tender and fateful hour of the night. The heavy clouds parted under the wind, revealing a vast, jagged opening. A faint, emerald-hued moonlight spilled through the canopy, illuminating the tiny green sanctuary where Cretaceous rested, tracing the edges of every shadow in a sanctified silver. The absolute silence that settled over the wilderness was accentuated by the soft, fragmented whispers of the polar breeze drifting from the distant plains. With the danger dispelled, Cretaceous surrendered his every tension. He began a deeply immersive, pre-sleep ritual, a uniquely Gigantoraptor performance. Starting from the tip of his tail, he slowly, vertebra by vertebra, stretched out the massive, strained muscle groups that had held him upright all day. He adjusted his posture, lowering his thick, aching abdomen, fatigued by the long journey and the recent confrontation, inch by inch toward the earth. He bent his legs, pillar-like and sturdy, allowing his heavy chest to meet the soft red soil that had absorbed the day's sunlight and was still radiating a gentle, vital warmth. In that instant, the heat stored within the earth for the entire day, a generous gift of the sun, flowed like a warm spring, seeping into the softer skin of his underbelly. This warmth penetrated his subcutaneous fat, wrapped around his weary muscle fibers, and spread quickly to every aching joint, purging the viscous anxiety within him. With a slow-motion elegance, he curled his mountain-like body into a sturdy circle, and with his expansive, feathered wings, he pulled them over himself like a giant, downy quilt, wrapping himself completely within. The internal warmth coupled with the unyielding gravity of the earth held an irresistible, hypnotic power. It was so stable that Cretaceous no longer felt like a fugitive roaming the land, he had become a piece of the bedrock, an indispensable core of the wild. The night had muted the ancient storms, and the sound of the wind in the treetops drifted away into the most soothing white noise. Supported by this most solid of sanctuaries, his eyelids grew heavy as iron, and his consciousness began to dissipate, melting slowly into a gentle, void-like dream. The end of life arrived with serene elegance. For Cretaceous, it was merely the most peaceful, deeply immersive night among countless nights before. It was the tail end of an ordinary dry season in the late Cretaceous. The air was permeated with the faint, bitter, and caramelized scent of dried gymnosperms, and the night sky was ablaze with thousands of gentle, streaking meteors. Cretaceous was too old. His internal heart, that massive pump, could no longer circulate warm blood to the furthest reaches of his 8-meter frame, and every breath brought the grinding sound of calcified wear deep within his chest. Yet, he displayed no panic. On that starlit night, he returned to the center of the warm red plains that had accompanied him for most of his life and settled down into his most familiar posture. He rested his weary head in a hollow of earth, the texture coarse and warm, offering his spirit a profound sense of release and reconciliation. As the weight of the warm, embracing soil took hold of his frame, a local sandstone cliff, weakened by long-term erosion, collapsed, pouring a mountain of soft, fine red sand and wind-blown dust into the hollow. There was no fear, no cry of distress. The ultimate master of relaxation on the plain simply drifted from his earthly dreams into eternal slumber, held within the sanctuary of his beloved moonlight and the familiar white noise of the wind. Over the next 100 million years, as the seas rose and fell, the ancient continent of Laramidia underwent endless cycles of fragmentation and reformation. What were once bustling shallows were crushed and uplifted into the cold, red earth Gobi rock strata of today. Yet, the form of Cretaceous, preserved in that perfect, bowed, resting posture, tightly encapsulated in sand and silt, underwent diagenesis and mineralization. Every delicate vertebra, every trace of his massive skull, became perfectly fused with the cold stone, a refined and intricate part of the Earth's very skeleton. 100 million years is like a silent, imperceptible torrent, ruthlessly washing away all pride and arrogance, yet it chose to preserve Cretaceous' restraint and tranquility. Forever solidified between the ribs of the Earth. Today, this massive specimen, heralded as the most elegant raptor fossil in existence, lies silent in a climate-controlled display case in a modern museum. Under the soft mercury lights, it continues to emanate an ancient, serene presence to all who pause before it. The rivers that accompanied him through countless years have long since dried, the towering swamp cypresses have long since turned into coal beneath the earth. Yet, the rhythm of his breathing from that distant night seems to echo faintly beneath the vast, urban sky of our modern era. In a world saturated with existential anxiety, where everyone is forced to run and life leaves us gasping for air, this story of an ancient hermit bowing in the twilight and falling into a slow-motion sleep on warm sand is your most grounded sanctuary tonight. You do not need to ponder tomorrow's toils or the mundane conflicts that leave you frayed and tense. The earth will receive you just as it received Cretaceous, lifting your weary body with the gentle weight of gravity and the boundless embrace of the night. At this very moment, your pillow radiates the perfect warmth, your blankets offer the reassuring physical comfort that mirrors the soft red sand and calm waters that cradled Cretaceous millions of years ago. Outside your window, the night wind of the modern city may be blowing, making your curtains ripple in the dark. These are the tender echoes of the breeze from that ancient promontory, resonating across time. Set aside all your defenses and burdens. Listen to this story, not to memorize it, but to let its measured, profound, and steady rhythm lead you, slowly, to close your eyes. Good night, Cretaceous the Gigantoraptor. Good night, to every soul that sheds its heavy armor in the darkness to return to the peace within.